So, Molly, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, nice to have you. I'm sorry, let's start over. Sorry, I'm like,
All right, let me start over.
yeah,
Molly, so nice to have you on the show.
thanks for having me.
Yeah. I always like to start with a little bit about you and what has brought you into this work. Like, why
Sure.
do you do this and how'd you
Yeah.
get here?
Well, so I'm a medical doctor by training. I started my career in Silicon Valley working with investors, executives, and entrepreneurs. And, I was very focused on just precision medicine and measuring labs and optimizing biomarkers and being essentially a biohacker, doctor, investigator for hire, helping people optimize their health and do personalized medical research. I ended up teaching at Stanford and they asked me to teach there. And when I was teaching a course on how to live better, longer, extending health span for longer lifespan, which became the foundation of my book that I wrote, The Spark Factor, I was like really kind of blown away that basically human relationships were one of the largest drivers of long-term health and happiness.
Mm,
And I became obsessed because I had already spent like a decade understanding metabolism. And that's a really hard topic to cover. It's a big topic.
right.
And energy metabolism is fundamental to longevity as well. And yet, one of the things that I learned in my research was that psychosocial stress, perceived or objective loneliness, perceived social isolation or objective social isolation, um, I realized that it was worse for your health than smoking, drinking, sedentary behavior, and obesity.
Wow.
And when I realized that relationship stress was one of the biggest drivers of, like, our relationships are a huge predictor of how we eat and how we move.
Yeah.
And so they actually play a much bigger role in our health than we give them credit for.
Huh.
We think that we're these islands and we just think that we're so separate, but actually our relationships are hugely influential in our health. And so I felt like by studying, I've kind of like come to this conclusion. It's not a full conclusion, but generally my working model of optimizing longevity and health span centers around energy. And the first pillar is energy metabolism, producing enough energy. Our biological imperative is to survive and reproduce. But then there's the human love facet, the human relationship facet. It's this energy connection, this connection to others with our energy, sharing information or resources happens in relationship.
Right.
And I realized that was an adaptive, we basically adapted to developing these human relationships and drives because it actually enhances our survival and
Mm,
our chance of reproduction. And then if you always go back to first principles, you can really understand the nature of life. And then the third pillar I realized was this energy direction. That how do we direct our energy to something productive? Whether it's making a child, building a company, creating a podcast, building an art piece, everyone and every single thing in nature has a purpose. And there's this huge meaning crisis happening right now. So
hmm
if you have great relationships and you have, create like relationships themselves can be a purpose, just being a parent or being a mother or being a caregiver. But when people are lacking meaning and purpose and they have nowhere to direct their energy, or let's say you lose your job or a partner and you feel like life is meaningless, that can seriously degrade your health and your finances. So all of these things are intertwined, right? Like our ability to create value through our meaning and purpose provides us financial wellness as well and gives us the money to actually maintain our bodies. So we need healthy energy metabolism, we need healthy relationships, and we need a healthy meaning and purpose to create financial wellness to live as long as possible.
Right.
And the cool thing about mitochondria and mitochondrial health, these little organelles in our cells, these power plants, is that they literally have energy currency. And the energy currency of the cell is essentially your battery or your bank account, and we're kind of like little video game characters. And if we take care of our energy production or energy connection or energy direction, we get to flourish. And that's my main goal in life is how do you enhance human flourishing? So how does that lead me to Adamo? Well, I built this company Adamo because I kind of was looking at this space of um, people having a lot of problems with their sexuality. And I was like, I was able to overcome big sexual dysfunction with the help of MDMA. Now, MDMA getting approved as a drug has unfortunately been stifled by a recent FDA ruling.
Yeah.
But I do credit psychedelics for helping me heal from sexual trauma, which enabled me to have a normal sex life. And I've always been really passionate about helping people overcome the same things I've been able to overcome. You know, I've overcome a lot of different problems in this lifetime. And one of the biggest ones was I used to have terrible sex, and it was really painful. I didn't get aroused. I was really struggling with orgasm with a partner.
Right.
And it was learning about sex and learning about my nervous system, learning about polyvagal theory, learning about how did psychedelics heal me? Like, oh, I realized that it literally MDMA is a trauma healing tool, because what it does is it resets the implicit, explicit memory systems around the trauma itself, and moves it from the present tense to the past tense in the brain, in the hippocampus. And that's a remarkable innovation. So I was like, wow, like maybe I could build a company around psychedelic assisted sex therapy. And the funny thing is that the psychedelics we were working on were actually very functional, but they were, I mean, after seeing MDMA get kind of slammed by the FDA, I was like, there's really no path for me to do that in particular. But
Not
I do
yet.
think that, not yet, but
Yeah.
I am talking to ketamine assisted therapy companies about partnering with them, with our company, to bring our method to market. Now, we also just realized that we ran our, we essentially developed the sex therapy for the psychedelic medicine. And the sex therapy is actually independent of the medicine, very functional. It works really well. And we ran a study on it, and we discovered that, in fact, it's very effective for treating sexual dysfunction and improving sexual satisfaction in healthy people. And, you know, Masters and Johnson developed this thing called sensate therapy in the 60s, and it's been the gold standard since. And unfortunately, it doesn't actually address sex itself.
Right.
And so we decided to really develop a psychosexual somatic therapy for couples to work on their sexual relationship. And it's an extension of sensate therapy into the act of sex, but it also involves a lot of development around the erotic mind and helping people recognize their sovereignty of their bodies. It teaches a lot of consent practices, and it really just creates a better sexual experience for men and women.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm trying to think of the 25 questions I had while you were talking. So first of all, I love that relationships are seen as one of the three pillars of our health and our energy and longevity.
Yes.
You know, it has frustrated me for so long that insurance doesn't cover couples counseling.
Nope.
As if it's just, I don't know, like has no bearing on your actual physical or mental health, which is crazy. Maybe,
It actually
right? Like
directly affects your mitochondria function. There's research now that demonstrates that caregiving stress is one of the most stressful metabolic experiences of a person's life. Like it can actually damage a person's metabolism by just being completely drained from caregiving. And we don't give moms enough credit of how hard it is to actually be a mother. It's an incredibly challenging job.
yeah. Yeah. All right. So in terms of this relationship wheel, which of course is, you know, that's what we're talking about here in my podcast. So is the Adamo method specifically only about the sexual relationship, or is it targeting this whole process or all these pillars of longevity?
We really built the word Adamo. Well, the company is based on the science of love. And human connection and love are sort of interchangeable concepts, right? If you get into the research space, they call it emotional closeness. Or there's this thing called the triangular theory of love, which is passion, intimacy, and commitment. And if you have passion, intimacy, and commitment, you have consummate love. And frankly, I was like kind of obsessed with the science of love when I started this company, because I was like, if love is fundamental to our longevity, to our reproduction, to our survival, to our quality of life, then why are we not trying to build products and services around improving it? So I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to figure out a way to increase feelings of love between partners. And we actually were able to statistically significantly increase feelings of love in committed partners. That means there's a bunch of different markers, as I mentioned. So there's emotional closeness. Emotional closeness is measured by two circles. And two circles being completely apart is not emotionally close.
Right.
Two circles being completely overlapping is total codependence.
Yeah.
We took people from level 3 to level 4. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, I think, of levels of emotional closeness. So we literally moved people an entire standard deviation closer, which is really cool, right? Like we actually brought couples closer. So that's one measure of love. The thing we also did is we measured intimacy, passion, and commitment. Now, we were not able to majorly affect attachment or commitment because we studied an attached committed relationship group of couples.
Right,
We
right.
couples in our study who were already attached, not new couples, not brand new relationships. It was people who'd been in a relationship for 6 months or longer. So they'd already developed an attachment. Then we also, but that's cool. That's fine. There's plenty of attachment therapists out there that can do that. What we did discover is that we could increase feelings of intimacy and passion. And, that's actually, intimacy and passion is romantic love. So we were actually able to increase the feelings of romance in a partnership that we're in committed relationships, which is a really cool thing to do.
Yeah.
And nobody is, as far as I can tell, nobody's developed a medical protocol to literally do that. So that was really inspiring and lovely. I felt really accomplished at that. But the things that we also were able to do were really just increase sexual satisfaction, sexual communication, reduce sexual shame, increase sexual confidence. And then some surprising things. We actually were able to reduce the pleasure gap between men and women. So we were able to basically increase orgasm frequency and orgasm quality in women and men. But I'm sure you know this, like there's a huge gap in pleasure.
Oh yeah.
A lot of women are never having an orgasm with their partner.
Right.
And, I have friends that are in school to become sex therapists and they've never had an orgasm with a partner. And in fact, it was a big problem for me in my 20s. I was unable to have an orgasm with a partner.
Right.
And I've discovered that, I already had a pretty good capacity to have a great sex life before I learned what I learned. But, Aaron Michael and Saida Desolé were the sex therapists that I worked with to develop this therapy. And they really brought me a new understanding of my body that I never really had, which was I didn't understand my sexual pleasure anatomy. And now that I know it, I'm like multi-orgasmic. And it's pretty wild to go from like thinking I had a great sex life to being like, whoa,
to really
I'm like,
having a great one. Yeah.
like really off the charts, magnificent sex.
Yeah.
And it's really inspiring because I thought I was pretty much overcoming all my sexual dysfunction. But as I learned, I was still experiencing sexual pain. And it was because I wasn't fully aroused and I wasn't giving myself the opportunity to learn how to become aroused. And we can actually teach that through our method. And so I learned how to do this thing called pelvic floor breathing and learn to push my pelvic floor out, not just pull up through Kegels. And it was like, oh, this is obviously helpful because now I'm more aroused, I have more lubrication. And those were measurably improved in our study as well. The most surprising thing in our study, though, which was not expected, was sexual desire went down. And the weird thing is that sexual satisfaction went way up. So I think that what we were able to do was make people so much more satisfied with their sex lives that there was like, and because they were consistently having sex, it's like imagining if you're consistently eating 3 healthy meals a day.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're eating really well, you might not be that hungry in between.
You're not that hungry.
Right? Yeah.
You're just like satisfied. And you're like, this is great. And, one of my guy friends, I was like, well, because I haven't been married before. And so I don't really know what it's like to be married yet. But I was like, what's it like being married and having sex with someone for like a decade? And he's like, how you have your favorite breakfast or brunch? Whenever you go to a restaurant, it's like, that's your favorite meal when you have brunch. Well, that's what it's like. It's like, it's your favorite person. And I was like, that's a really cool way to think about it. But the thing that's a lot of people struggle with is their sexual repertoire is limited. And so, a lot of what we learn about sex is found in porn. And it's just not an experience that a lot of people want to be having every time they have sex. And so what we were able to do is literally create a new pathway for teaching how to have sex with suction versus sex with friction. And that to me was a really amazing, just like innovation that Aaron Michael really developed. And he was basically able to teach different hip movements and different ways of having a receptive partner bring in your partner through suction, through pushing at your pelvic floor and pulling in your partner. And then so that kind of changes the whole experience of sex from being penetrated to bringing someone into you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once someone is inside of you, you're learning to use your hips together against like sort of like using in the same direction with your partner in opposite directions of your partner. So you're creating more physical contact with your genitals during the sexual experience. Instead of it being this in and out, like constant motion, you're giving yourself the opportunity to create a deeper literal connection and more energy and sensation. And so that to me was like another big aha moment. It was like, wow, this is a really important concept that everybody in the world should learn how to have sex in a way that's not painful, that increases arousal and pleasure. And it gives men an opportunity in particular who struggle with erectile dysfunction it's okay to not be hard the entire time you're having sex. That's actually a normal thing. And we don't treat it as it's normal. And then they have to medicate it every time that it happens. And it's actually a natural part of being in and out of arousal. And the same thing goes with women. A lot of women are taught that, you just, if you just, once you hit your perimenopause and menopausal years, sex is over for you. Well, it's not. You may not have the same level of lubrication or the same, vaginal tissues, but if you learn to have sex in a way that isn't painful, that is actually more along, it works with your physiology, not against it, then sex as you age can be just as good as sex when you're younger.
Yeah.
If not better.
So I feel like there's so much in this conversation, and I'm trying to decide what questions to ask to give direction here. I guess, can you talk a little bit about what the method is, and like what the process is, or what's included in this, or, because you're alluding to some things, but I think it would help the listeners to understand, like, is this a medical intervention? Is this sexual instructions? Like what's involved?
So there's an intake system. So we're going to give you the same questions that we gave our clinical study participants. We're asking questions from the new sexual satisfaction scale, the female sexual function index. There's a male sexual function index. There's sexual communication scale, and then there's the emotional closeness measures, and then the triangular theory of love scale. So we're going to give you a full intake.
So you're getting that benchmark of where people are starting.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you start the method with an orientation to the platform, and then you go through the parts of the method that are around the embodied psychosexuality. So the first 3 weeks are really about you and your sexuality, because we believe that when you are in greater touch with what you desire, what you don't desire, and you can communicate that with your partner, you're going to be way more prepared for the more somatic parts. So we ease you in over time into the act of penetration. And we teach you about all sorts of things you can do before penetration to create a better experience. And then in the act of penetration, we're teaching you about that suction technique. We're teaching you about how to bring your partner into you, whether you're gay or straight, whether you're trans or cis, doesn't matter. This program is not designed to be heteronormative or designed for like specific genders or sexualities. It's like anybody who engages in penetrative sex can use this. But we are teaching a new way of moving hips. We're teaching new ways of understanding how to read your partner during sex. We also teach a very thorough embodied consent practice. So embodied consent is about reading your partner and knowing what they are saying without saying any words. Now, that is something that I think everyone needs to learn to avoid sexual trauma. Most people don't realize that sexual trauma occurs usually in a consensual context, and it can happen in a committed relationship. So we absolutely have to train people properly on embodied consent. But we also need to make sex fun, like learn to grind with your clothes on. We learn to bring back some pleasure, some of the fun of like a lot of people forget that because we're rushing penetration, we're like missing a lot of the intimacy practices that we can do with our partner before we even have penetration. So there's a lot of those intimacy practices. And there's meditations, there's journal practices. I mean, we found that the people found the journal entries were actually really powerful, brought up a lot of stuff for people.
Yeah.
But you want your stuff brought up if you're going to work through the challenges you have in your sex life. Then there's obviously the psychosexual, lessons that you're just going to watch videos. And then there's the somatic lessons where you watch videos and then you practice with your partner. Yeah. So and then you end the program with how to really create a deeper, stronger bond between you and your partner. And then you do a follow-up, interview. And then from there, we like basically, give you a like follow-up, questionnaire, and then that gets fed back into a system. And then you get an end report to show the improvements that you made. Yeah. So the goal is that you go through the whole program and you go from beginning to the end.
Yeah. And you've got some measurable
Yeah.
change besides just
we
whatever you
also,
experience, you know, what you think you're experiencing. You also have some actual data behind that.
exactly. And
Yeah.
we've designed this to be available to, sex therapists, couples therapists, OBGYNs, pelvic floor therapists who want to learn to prescribe it, because it is a prescribable program. And so we're developing a prescriber's course right now that just gives some scenarios of where people might get stuck, but you don't have to you don't have to memorize the whole thing just because
Right.
you're like learning this. Like, it's honestly, I've gone through this 3 times and I'm still learning things from it. So I find it to be one of the more robust methodologies that's out there. And, sensate therapy was created by Masters and Johnson. Basically, Masters and Johnson passed sensate therapy down through an oral tradition, which means that it was basically telephone. People were going to seminars and passing it on. And there's basically just a lot of people who are like, I don't know, there's just like a lot of people who have learned it through books and learned it through, learn it through sex therapy platforms. But, it's Masters, there's no videos of Masters and Johnson teaching it, as far as I know.
Right.
It's kind of like passed down. And that's because creating an innovation in sex therapy is an enormous task, and it takes a lot of real effort and time. And I do have to give credit where credit's due to Aaron, Michael, and Sayeda Desolé, because they are absolutely brilliant. It was their brainchild. And, I hired them to work with our company to build it, but it was really a combination of their lives' work that went into this.
Right. So is it meant for couples to do? Is there some part of the program that's
Yeah.
really about enhancing communication and how to talk
Yes,
to your partner about this?
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. We really try to teach people. The first step is just being able to talk to yourself about what you like and don't like. A lot of people have never even asked themselves,
Right.
what do I really like and don't like? And, we did have most of our couples discovered that they were closer, but we do give a disclaimer that you might discover that you and your partner are just not compatible sexually, and you never knew this. So
Right.
we have to let people know going into this that there are risks.
Right. Right. How does all this stuff apply to non-penetrative sexual activity? Because so much of
Well,
it, I'm hearing it so like penetration
I mean,
focused.
we wanted to really build a penetrative focus protocol because we knew that was where there was a lot of problems with sex, and that there's already like thousands of couples therapists out there helping with the psychological facets of intimacy. But to me and to our team, we felt that penetration was like a really big missing piece. Now, I do believe that we definitely would want to build a program for singles. That would be really helpful for people. But I do think that like the reality is that that just costs money, and we don't have it right now. We're a startup, so we don't have the money to build more protocols. But I do think it'd be really helpful to build one for singles.
Yeah.
Now, a little known thing that's not in our method that we probably should add is that if you use more suction during oral sex, it actually makes for a much better experience for everybody. And a lot of people kind of look at oral sex as just this in and out motion of like, with fellatio or cunnilingus. And it's really not that good if it's kind of just friction oriented. So I do encourage people who are listening, if you are learning, if you really do want more tips on sex itself, like Aaron Michael has an amazing repertoire of online courses, along with Sayeda Desolé, and both of them, this is just a small sliver of what they've created for the world. They've created a lot of really good content, and I'm happy to link to them as well. And in fact, I'd love to recommend that they be on your podcast next.
That's a good idea. I'll gather their info from you at the end here.
Totally.
Oh shoot, I had a question. It totally escaped me. Just a second. It'll come back to me. Oh, trauma.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how this is helpful or healing for people that have had sexual trauma? Because you talked about the psychedelics, which, you've had to at least, it sounds like, postpone. Is this a method that's appropriate for people?
We are actually talking to people we're talking to companies that are in fact dedicated to building products and services around psychedelic medicine. And there's a very good chance that we'll end up partnering with one of these companies to get this thing to market in that way. We're talking to like 3 different companies right now. So I do think that, I mean, the real original mission of doing this was about how do I help women and men who've experienced sexual trauma regain a normal sex life?
Mm-hmm.
And so first and foremost, this is a very trauma-informed program on purpose. You have to be trauma-informed if you're going to be dealing with intimacy and sex, because there's widespread sexual trauma that's not really discussed. I'm sure you guys know the statistics, but it's about 20% of women are raped in college. 25% of little girls have been sexually abused. That number is an astonishing number. That should just honestly,
yeah, I think it's 1 in 6 boys.
1 in 6 boys.
Yeah.
And that will permanently, not in every case, but a large percentage of these individuals will develop PTSD. It's about 30% of individuals raped will develop PTSD, but about 60 to 80% will develop sexual dysfunction. And when I saw that number in the literature, it was a very obscure paper. I had a deep dive for it. And I was like, oh my God, that was me. I was that girl who had experienced sexual dysfunction secondary to trauma. And my nervous system had been reorganized that sex was unsafe.
Yeah.
And so when your nervous system says sex is not safe, then you cannot actually have a highly functioning sexual response.
Right.
Because the sexual response involves the brakes and the gas pedal. And if the gas pedal is if the brakes are on too high because your body is in a state of threat, then your body won't actually be able to let you get through the whole cycle of orgasm.
Right.
And as a result of my nervous system being so dysregulated during sex that I was unable to actually be embodied, I was mostly dissociated. And, you know, the beauty of Saida Desalei's work is she is like she teaches an embodied psychosexuality that is really effective at teaching embodiment. And I've never met anybody else that teaches embodiment like she does. And it definitely helped me become more embodied, but you have to learn some somatic practices. So we do have this thing called the chill room in our program that enables people to basically the chill room is where people can go if they get a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess,
yeah.
Go ahead. You were going to say.
I was going to say that we intended for this thing to be taught in a way that would make it possible for somebody who was experiencing like a sense of threat or a sense of being flooded to pause and be able to return to center before they move forward.
Yeah. Do you imagine people go through this program under the care of a therapist or a doctor or something? Like, do they have access to people for support, or is this something that's
so we have our team available for support right now. We are actively recruiting therapists who are interested in working with us. So if there's anyone listening as a therapist and wants to learn this method and be able to prescribe it and, you know, be employed by us part-time just to answer texts, that's something that we're working on. But yeah, we're really ambitiously focused on how do we recruit people to be a part of our team to support others.
Yeah. Okay. Last question I was going to ask is anything about future trends in the medical field? I mean, it seems, like you're carving new pathways here. What else do you see on the horizon, especially as it relates to, intimacy, sex, relationships, and its effect on health?
Right. So I have to say that there is going to be an AI element in the future to a lot of medicine for a good reason. And I do think that AI is something that I use every day. And I think when we can feed AI reams and reams of research and literature, and it can do a pretty good job at providing an answer that's evidence-based, that's the future where things are going. And I'm actually working with an AI company that's doing this. That's something that I would definitely recommend, people think about is like AI is going to get incredibly smart, but I don't think people only want to talk to AI.
Right.
And I think you really need to have a human judgment, especially when it comes to human relationships, because AI is not really designed for empathy. So I think there's always going to be a human element involved with our company. We'll never hand this off to AI only, and I will never only use AI to answer questions. But it's almost like thinking about augmentation of therapists, augmentation of doctors. There's a really cool company called Ritual that it does couples therapy, AI assisted, and they're doing really, really well. So I think this is a big thing that's coming.
Yeah. Cool. So where do people go to learn more and to access the content?
www.livingadamo.com, www.drmolly.co, and at Living Adamo and at drmolly.co on Instagram.
Perfect. I will put that in the show notes too. So people, people don't have to try to remember that. Great.